The Library of Alexandria is often romanticized as the greatest intellectual treasure of the ancient world, a grand fortress of knowledge where bearded philosophers debated under towering columns. It's a staple in the greatest losses of human history list, along with Atlantis and Blockbuster Video. Did the Library of Alexandria even exist as we imagine it, or is it just an overhyped myth, an ancient equivalent of an urban legend that spiraled out of control? Let's dive deep into this legendary library, separate fact from fiction, and explore why it continues to captivate imaginations even today. The birth of a legend, or a very convincing lie. The story begins in the 3rd century BCE, during the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. The Ptolemies, a Greek-speaking family that took over after Alexander the Great, were ambitious about making Alexandria the intellectual capital of the world. They wanted a library so vast it would house every book known to humankind. And thus, the Library of Alexandria was allegedly born. One of the earliest mentions of this grand institution comes from a letter written by a man named Aristides. He described how Demetrius of Phalerum, the king's librarian, was given unlimited money, a dream for every book lover, to collect all the books in the world. The goal? A mind-blowing 500,000 scrolls. Imagine an ancient Jeff Bezos, but instead of selling books, he's hoarding them like an obsessed collector. Here's the problem. The letter of Aristides is a well-known forgery. Scholars today believe it was written at least a century later than it claims, and Aristides himself might never have existed. So, did someone just make up the idea of the library? If that's the case, congratulations, ancient world, you created the first ever viral misinformation campaign. The idea of a universal library may have been born from political propaganda rather than actual historical truth. But hey, if people have been embellishing history for centuries, why stop now? Just how big was this library? Despite the questionable origins, plenty of ancient sources have thrown their estimates into the mix. If these numbers were a game of darts, they were being thrown by people who were very bad at math. Roman philosopher Seneca, 49 Common Era. The library had 40,000 scrolls. Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, 4th century Common Era. The library had 700,000 scrolls. The Roman physician Galen, 2nd century Common Era. The library was filled by forcing every ship that docked in Alexandria to surrender its books, which were copied and returned. Or, in true ancient Amazon fashion, they just kept the originals. So how many books were actually there? Modern historian Roger Bagnall put on his detective hat and pointed out that if every known Greek writer of the 3rd century BCE wrote 50 scrolls, that would only amount to 31,250 books, far less than the jaw-dropping estimates. Maybe the Library of Alexandria wasn't the all-knowing fortress of wisdom after all. Maybe it was just a really impressive library with some really exaggerated PR. Or perhaps, like any good historical mystery, the truth is somewhere in between. After all, when something is lost to time, who's going to fact-check the ancient historians? If anything, the varying estimates suggest one thing. People love a good story, especially when it makes history sound more epic. The Great Fire. Did Julius Caesar really burn it down? If the Library of Alexandria is famous for one thing, it's burning down in spectacular fashion. The typical Hollywood version goes like this. Julius Caesar, during his military campaign in Alexandria, 48 BCE, got cornered, panicked, and set fire to some ships. The fire spread to the city, and poof, there goes the greatest collection of human knowledge in history. Cue dramatic slow-motion flames and scholars crying over smoldering scrolls. But hold on a second. Ancient writers like Strabo, who lived in Alexandria after Caesar's attack, never actually mentioned the destruction of a grand library. If Caesar did burn part of it, it might have been a warehouse containing some scrolls, but not the legendary library. In other words, if he did damage anything, it was probably the ancient equivalent of a storage unit, not the world's ultimate knowledge vault. So, who else is to blame? Christian monks in 391 Common Era supposedly destroyed the Serapeum, a smaller library in Alexandria, as part of an anti-pagan purge. This may have led to further losses of valuable texts. The Muslim Caliph Amr in 624 Common Era is another suspect, with legends claiming he burned the books to heat bathhouses for 6 months, which sounds more like a medieval insult than a reliable fact. But even many Muslim scholars later dismissed this as fabricated propaganda. Other Roman emperors also sacked Alexandria multiple times, each attack possibly contributing to the slow loss of knowledge. Or the most boring but likely answer, the library simply decayed over time. Papyrus scrolls don't last forever, especially in humid environments. If no one maintained the library, the knowledge might have quite literally rotted away. The idea of a single catastrophic fire is much more dramatic and tragic, but the truth is probably far less cinematic. Was it even a library, or just a fancy museum? While we picture the Library of Alexandria as a grand hall lined with shelves of neatly arranged scrolls, some historians think it was more of a research institution than a public library. It may have functioned more like an elite academic center, where scholars gathered to exchange ideas rather than simply borrow books. Think of it as a prestigious university rather than an ancient version of a public library. The ancient Greek geographer Strabo described the Mausian, which means seat of the muses, as the real heart of Alexandria's intellectual scene. This was a place where philosophers, mathematicians, scientists, and writers collaborated to advance knowledge, not necessarily where average citizens could walk in and borrow a scroll on astronomy. Think of it as Hogwarts for scholars, where the pursuit of wisdom was sacred, but the books weren't necessarily accessible to the general public. Instead of wand-waving wizards, it was home to brilliant minds like Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's circumference, Aristarchus, who proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, and Archimedes, the guy who shouted Eureka while bathing. The idea of a universal library might have grown in legend more than in reality, with each generation adding a little more grandeur to its story. It might not have been the Google of the ancient world, but it definitely played a crucial role in advancing human knowledge. And even if we never find its ruins, its legendary status ensures that it will remain one of history's greatest what-if mysteries for centuries to come. The library's true legacy, an idea that never burned. So, after all this investigation, what do we actually know about the Library of Alexandria? It probably existed, but not in the way pop culture suggests, and its scale might have been greatly exaggerated over time. It may never have been a single building, but rather a collection of institutions that together formed the intellectual heart of Alexandria. It wasn't necessarily burned in one grand event, rather, it likely faded away due to neglect, political upheavals, and time itself. But here's the real magic of the library. Even if it didn't live up to the myth, its legend has inspired generations of scholars, librarians, and book lovers. The dream of collecting and preserving all human knowledge in one place led to the creation of Renaissance libraries, and much later, institutions like the Library of Congress, which now holds over 51 million books and 173 million items in total. Even Google Books, with its mission to digitize the world's knowledge, is an attempt at recreating Alexandria's dream of universal access to information. Let's just hope it doesn't end up in flames, though at least digital books don't need papyrus scroll maintenance. And that's the mystery of the Library of Alexandria. Was it the ultimate knowledge vault, or just ancient hype? If you love this deep dive into history's greatest what-if, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more mind-blowing stories. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an epic tale from the past. And tell us in the comments, if you had one day in the Library of Alexandria, what book would you grab first?